Whether main character energy is real in New York or not is, yes, that is the reality.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Kind Not Nice podcast. If you're new here, I'm Bianca and this is Grace, and we talk about all things life, career, love, and living in New York.
In this episode, we thought it would be fun to do a little bit of a New York City expectations versus reality. Like being the main character, you see so many TV shows about living in New York, living out your dreams, romanticizing the city, and we just wanted to talk about our two sides of the coin to that. Okay, so to kick us off, we wanted to talk a little bit about the popular TV shows that sort of glamorize New York City. And for us, the few ones that we've watched are like probably Gossip Girl, Sex and the City, and Bianca has watched Friends, even though I personally haven't. And I would say that those shows really glamorize and romanticize New York in a certain way. Like in Gossip Girl, you see all these like really wealthy people living on the Upper East Side, and what's funny about Gossip Girl is that Dan, who is supposedly the poor one, is not poor at all. They live in like a multi-million-dollar apartment in Brooklyn, so I think it just really glamorizes living in the city. And I think for me personally, there are moments where in New York, like, yes, you have main character energy, like when you're going out with your friends on like a really late night and like everything just clicks and like you're just really happy, or like when things happen at work. And like, for example, when I first got my first bonus number in banking, I was just like, wow, like I'm in New York and I've made it. But also I think the lows can be really low, and maybe those are not as obvious in the TV shows in the way that New York is romanticized for people.
An aspect of these shows and movies is that they definitely show like the best parts of New York.
100%.
Like you see them filming in like the Upper West Side or in West Village, and these are like areas that are so beautiful and like very quaint and quintessential New York vibes, that it creates that romanticized feeling of being in New York that isn't always realistic, because there are so many other aspects of New York that display kind of the income differences. And also in movies and shows, like you don't experience all the senses, and so the smell as well is like also not there too. So I do think the realities of living in New York that we might not see aren't always shown in modern day entertainment.
In those shows, somehow everything is like free, right? Like people are not paying for things. They're not like worried about the price of things, but that is not the reality of living here at all.
Right. Yeah. And I think like similar to what we discussed in our last episode about living in New York apartments, like apartments can be small, and for the average person they are. I think it's only if like you're very like rich or well off that you can see maybe like large apartments that are similar to the ones that you might see in like Sex and the City and Friends, right? And so
I think as people would say, like in Sex and the City, there's no way that Carrie could afford the apartment that she was staying in at the time. Same thing with Friends, right? Like people, there's no way that they could afford the apartment that they were staying in. And it's just very out of touch with how much things actually cost compared to the salary that they were earning. Yeah.
But I think going back to the question about do you often feel like main character energy, I still think that exists. While those like areas that are romanticized in shows may not exist in real life all the time, I think at a personal level, because people are like working on themselves, doing their own thing, they're basically the main characters of their lives, and they basically can embody that if they wanted to.
Okay, so I guess our answer on whether main character energy is real in New York or not is yes, that is the reality. It's not a false reality created by shows or anything like that.
It's just maybe how people might picture the day-to-day of New York being constantly like how they are in shows. I think that's where it's not a reality.
I don't think most shows show you what it's like to take the subway during rush hour. It is like you are crowded in that train. It is so uncomfortable. But it's just the reality of living here. Like people do it every day.
You know, interestingly, I'm trying to remember like these shows if they ever had a scene like within the subway. I don't
No.
think so. Yeah, it's always like in a car.
Oh my gosh, there was this moment in Gossip Girl where Blair was talking about going to Columbia, and her boyfriend was like, oh, you can like take the subway downtown, it's really easy, and she was like, I've never taken the subway in my life. Yeah,
that's very unrealistic.
I feel like even it would be hard for me to imagine even someone who is uber wealthy in New York City never ever taking the subway. Yeah, because sometimes it is the more convenient option at the end of the day.
Right.
Like your traffic could be 2 hours, but on the subway it's 1 hour. Finding apartments is really competitive and really hard, and apartments can be gone in the blink of an eye. Like you have to get every single thing ready before you go to tour an apartment and submit your application on the spot, and even then you might get rejected because the person before you might have gotten the apartment. Yeah. And the average time to find an apartment in New York is like, it's really stressful because your lease, like it takes like 2 to 3 weeks. So like you're basically looking at the very tail end of your lease. Like a lot of times you don't have something locked in until very, very close to when your lease ends.
Right.
So that's also pretty stressful. And I think like if you want, it's very hard to balance like a reasonable price and amount of space with a reasonable commute time. Like, I think you have to give up on a few of these things.
You have to make trade-offs. I think the broker fee one was a change for me when I moved here.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes the broker fees, it can feel like a scam. Like, it's like they might charge like what, like 1 or 2
1 month's rent?
Yeah, 1 month's rent just to have a broker. And sometimes they require a broker.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I think thankfully there are buildings that don't require a broker. And so I personally just unclick the ones that require it.
I know, but with a broker you get shown more options than if you did without a broker. So I feel like there's that trade-off, but I think brokers are kind of useless in my opinion.
And speaking to your point about how it's very competitive to find apartments here, so a personal story that I had was that when I found my place, I toured the apartment with like 11 other people.
11.
All came at the same time. And then I remember like walking down the hallway, going back to the elevator when we were all exiting, sending the email as I was in the elevator going down. And I knew like I needed to do this ASAP because once the tour was done, like everyone
is gonna hound it. Yeah.
So thankfully, that worked out and they ended up choosing me first.
Congratulations.
But it's like that speed that you really need to like get on it for apartment hunting here. And I think in general for things in New York, it's just like everyone's going to do things very quickly because they know how competitive it is. Yeah.
But it's a good habit to get into.
Yeah.
But I will say, I think even though I feel like I have the instinct to always do things faster and faster, but I have learned to train myself to sometimes make a decision slower because it is just better for the overall like decision making process. The instinct or the tendency is to always move faster and faster and faster, but sometimes I've learned that you'll get a better result if you like are more intentional.
That's a good lesson.
I think it's like a tendency of the city to go that way. Next topic that we wanted to talk about is basically how careers in New York are really glamorized, where you're like working in these really fancy offices and you're going to really fancy dinners and you're paid a lot of money and like you're working really late with all of your colleagues. And a lot of shows glamorize this, I think. So for example, like, Industry I think is set in London, but you know the vibe of the show that I'm talking about, right? And like
Devil Wears Prada.
Devil Wears Prada for the fashion industry, Suits for the legal industry, like all these shows sort of glamorize that sort of lifestyle that people think about New York. But is that the reality? Like, what expectation versus reality?
I think that there are aspects of that, like people who work in those industries for sure, like people who work in like the tall skyscrapers, like the office culture, people wearing business formal fashion, like that all exists. But I do think that the TV shows don't display like the full spectrum of what exists in New York. So they only show kind of one population. Of course, there are like restaurant workers and people who work in like the carts, the food carts. And like there's so many diverse occupations that exist in New York that may not always be displayed in the shows. The thing that I personally experienced to like open my eyes more to this other aspect of the workforce within New York was I'd have reasons to like wake up really early and then go into the city. So this would be like before sunrise. So like 6 a.m. in the morning before sunrise, and the trains would be packed.
Wow.
Yeah, people would be going into the city to go to their work, and made me realize that there's a whole life outside white collar 9-to-5 workers. And these are people who like are getting ready in their restaurants, starting their businesses, the local bodega. Like then you realize, oh, these people have been up working for the last like 2-3 hours already.
Yeah.
So I think that part is like not really represented in shows as much, but it definitely showcases the diversity of people and occupations that exist in New York.
The next topic that we wanted to talk about is dating expectations versus reality, because you would think that like you would be able to meet the coolest population of people ever in New York, right? Like very ambitious, very interesting, like diverse hobbies, just like all around interesting groups of people to date. But the reality is that a lot of my friends think that the dating here is really bad, especially for women. It just seems that people are very, very non-committal because there's so many fish in the sea, and like you're always looking for better than the current one, and it's hard to find someone to settle down.
It can be true for sure. Yeah, I think a common like story that I hear from friends dating is that dating app culture is also very big, and then you can see like so many people like at one point in time that are also dating in New York. It can lead to that feeling of like non-commitment because someone's also going to be seeing like another person. But I do think that the right people will gravitate to you, and it also depends on like the type of energy and aura and like the intention behind dating that you put into the process. And I personally think that if another person is also looking for that, then you'll find a way to each other. So I do think it requires a lot of time to get to that point, and that's why it can be really frustrating, because you also have to sift through the shit before you get to that person. But I do think it's possible to find the right person here. And I think there's also a higher percentage that you would find the type of person you want, especially if the shared values are around like drive and ambition and like growth mindset. More likely that you'll find that in New York.
Agree.
And so I think there's different pros and cons to dating in New York for those reasons.
The last thing that we wanted to talk about is basically like food culture. And in New York, I do think you have some of the best food in the world. Like it is, every sort of cuisine like is so good here. Like I would say every sort of cuisine is well represented, and it's like at least an 8 out of 10 in terms of quality. But to me, the flip side of that coin is that it is really, really brutal getting reservations. There's a lot of hype around certain restaurants, and then it's like impossible to get into. So it's always constantly fighting for these reservations. And also you can go have a really like expensive meal and it can still be very average, because things here like they can price it a certain way and maybe you expect it to be really good, but like it can turn out to be very mediocre at the end of the day. So that's what I have to say about it.
Right. Yeah. And I think speaking of price, I agree. I feel like that's something that I consider on like how I would rate restaurants.
Yeah.
And I think the reality is like everything else in terms of money in New York, like everything will be priced more than they should. And TikTok and like Instagram, like they just hype up a lot of restaurants, and then it ends up a lot of people go to those same places because they see it on social media. And then that makes it very difficult to enjoy certain places. You just have to sometimes reserve places like weeks to months in advance just to have a reservation, especially for these popular, well-known places. But I do think this is especially true for Manhattan restaurants and like hip Brooklyn, Williamsburg restaurants. But if you go more in outskirts, like Queens, amazing food, and you're less likely to have issues like this, although maybe the ambiance and like environment of those restaurants aren't as good, but the food is like more authentic. So definitely would recommend exploring outside of like the main areas of New York to have really great food.
As always, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. And if you enjoyed, please find us on Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. And we'll see you in the next one.
Great.